Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. I'm going to share something that happened to me and my friends back when we were teenagers. It was around the middle of September, back in 2011, in rural southern Ohio, near the edge of a tiny town called Fairview. My grandpa owned some property there, mostly fields and woods behind an old farmhouse he'd inherited from his parents. We'd go up there every fall, just us guys, me and 3 of my closest friends. Ryan, who'd always wear these oversized, goofy orange hunting hats. Kyle, a tall, skinny guy with a talent for making us laugh. And Nate, quiet, serious Nate, who always had some random wilderness fact to share. We'd camp out deep in the woods, roast marshmallows, tell ghost stories, just the usual teen stuff. It was our tradition, our escape, something we'd looked forward to all year. That particular year, we decided to set up camp a little further back than usual, deeper into the woods. Nate suggested a spot he'd found earlier that summer, a small clearing surrounded by these huge, twisted trees that looked like they'd been struck by lightning years ago. It felt isolated, hidden away, perfect for scary stories and late-night talks. We set up the tent, made a little stone fire pit, and gathered wood before it got dark. After everything was done, we sat around the fire, passing around bags of chips and cans of soda, laughing at Kyle's impressions of our teachers, just chilling. It was exactly what we all needed. A break from homework, parents, drama at school, just a bunch of teens feeling completely free for a night. It was around 10 p.m. when we first heard it. We had just finished laughing at some dumb joke Ryan made when Nate suddenly raised his hand, motioning for silence. We all froze instantly, listening hard. At first I heard nothing but the faint crackling of our dying fire and the whispering breeze shifting through the trees. Then it came again, clearer this time. The faint, unmistakable sound of a baby crying. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft, sad wail, almost like the wind itself was playing tricks on us. Ryan chuckled nervously, muttering something like, "What kind of animal sounds like that?" Kyle laughed it off too, saying it had to be some fox or raccoon making weird noises. Nate, being Nate, just shook his head slowly and said nothing. We tried to brush it off, but it was hard. The atmosphere had changed, less cozy, more tense. We all tried talking loudly again, drowning out whatever we'd heard. Kyle cracked a few more jokes and Ryan kept poking at the fire, causing sparks to leap out into the night air. But then the crying came back. Louder, closer. This time there was no denying it. It sounded exactly like a human baby. My heart started thumping in my chest, the sound echoing weirdly through the trees. Nate stood up and shined his flashlight toward the dark tree line, the beam shaking slightly in his hands. The crying stopped instantly. Silence again. But we all knew, deep down, whatever was out there was aware of us. And that scared the hell out of me. We sat in silence for a good minute, every one of us just listening, barely breathing. It's weird how a group of loud, joking teenage boys can suddenly go completely still when something feels truly off. Ryan finally whispered, "Should we check it out?" But none of us moved. The fire had burned low and the woods beyond it were just a black wall, shifting slightly in the breeze. I could see the white fabric of our tent glowing faintly in the corner of my vision, like a reminder that it was the only real barrier between us and whatever might be out there. Kyle tossed another log on the fire, and the sudden crackle made all of us jump. He laughed nervously, trying to play it cool, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. We tried to keep talking, to pretend it was nothing, but our voices sounded forced, too loud in the quiet. And then, maybe 15 minutes after the second cry, it happened again, only this time it was different. It started soft like before, but then the sound warped, got high-pitched, frantic, desperate. It didn't sound like a baby anymore, it sounded wrong, like someone trying to mimic a baby's cry and not quite getting it right. The hairs on my arms stood up. Nate turned his flashlight back toward the trees and muttered, "That's not a baby." None of us disagreed. Then came the footsteps. Fast, heavy, crunching through the dry leaves and underbrush, running toward us. We all jumped to our feet as the sound grew closer. Whatever it was, it wasn't trying to sneak up. It was barreling straight at us from somewhere out in the woods. Kyle screamed. Ryan grabbed a stick from the fire and waved it like a torch, the flames flaring wildly. I swear I saw something move, just a shape, tall and thin, slipping between two trees on the edge of our firelight. It was there for a second, maybe less, but I'll never forget the outline of it. Human, but not quite, like it was off somehow. Then it stopped. The footsteps went completely silent, as if someone had just yanked the sound out of the air. We didn't wait. Nate shouted, "Go!" And we all ran, barely grabbing our flashlights as we tore off through the woods, tripping over roots and slipping on leaves. I didn't even care if I left my phone or my bag behind. None of us did. The only thing I remember thinking was, "Don't fall, don't fall, don't look back." We bolted toward the edge of the woods, toward the farmhouse, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I could hear Kyle breathing hard behind me, someone else yelling something. Maybe Ryan, maybe just a scream. I honestly don't know. The moment we broke through the trees and saw the porch light glowing like a lighthouse in the dark, I almost collapsed from relief. My grandpa was already standing on the porch when we got there, shotgun in hand, looking confused and half asleep. I don't even remember what we said first. We were all shouting over each other, trying to explain through panting breaths what just happened. To his credit, he didn't question us much. He just motioned for us to get inside, locked the door behind us, and pulled the blinds shut without saying a word. We sat there in the living room, still shaking, watching as he loaded a few shells into the shotgun like it was just another night on the farm. That's when I noticed something. My grandpa looked pale. He didn't say it out loud, but I could see it on his face. He knew something. After we finally calmed down, Kyle asked if there were any animals in the area that could sound like a baby crying. My grandpa stared at the floor for a long second, then said, "Foxes can, sometimes." But the way he said it didn't sound convincing. Then Nate, still catching his breath, asked if anyone had ever gotten lost in those woods. That's when Grandpa finally looked up and said something I still think about to this day. Back in '78, a couple left a baby in those woods. Police never found it. Don't know if that has anything to do with what you heard. But when something cries like that out there, you don't go looking for it. You come home. We didn't say anything after that. No one did. The next morning, we went back with Grandpa to collect our stuff. The tent was still standing. Everything was exactly how we left it, except the fire had been put out. Not burned out. Put out. The ground around it was soaked, like someone had dumped water all over it. Our sleeping bags were zipped closed. Every one of them. And the weirdest thing, Ryan's flashlight, which he swore he had in his hand when we ran, was sitting upright on top of his pillow. Turned on. None of us said a word. We just packed everything up in silence and left. That was the last time we camped out there. Actually, it was the last time we camped anywhere for a long time. To this day, none of us really talk about it. Once in a while, if we're drinking or if a scary story comes up, someone might bring it up. But it always ends the same way. Quiet stares, nervous laughter, and someone changing the subject. I still don't know what was out there that night or why it chose to mess with us. Maybe it was just some sick prank. Maybe it was something older, something still echoing out there in those woods. All I know is I've never heard a sound like that before or since. And if I ever do again, I won't wait around to hear it a second time. Story 2. This happened to me about 2 years ago, around late October. I was 32 at the time, living in Albany, New York, and going through one of those phases where everything in life seems to break at once. I had just gone through a rough breakup, 6 years with someone who also happened to be deeply connected with a lot of my close friends. Long story short, I ended up being the one cut off socially. A lot of people picked sides, and I found myself suddenly ghosted by people I used to spend every weekend with. I needed to get out of the city for a bit, get my head straight. I remembered this lakeside campground I'd visited once years ago with my dad, somewhere near Lake Durant, kind of hidden off a back road that doesn't even have a name on Google Maps. It was the off-season, so I figured I'd have the place mostly to myself, which honestly sounded perfect. I got there on a Friday afternoon, The air was crisp, the kind of cold that clings to your clothes but still feels good to breathe in. Leaves had already started falling in waves, blanketing the dirt trails with this soft crunch that made everything feel distant and muted. I picked a spot near the edge of the lake, right where the trees opened up to a little slope that led down to the water. I brought my tent, a small propane stove, some basic food, and a stack of old paperbacks. I even left my laptop at home on purpose. I wanted to unplug, no drama, no social media, no texts, just me and the quiet. The only other car I saw was a beat-up black Nissan parked closer to the entrance of the campground, probably 200 yards away. No tent, no people, nothing around it. I assumed maybe someone was hiking nearby or left their car for a longer trip. That first night was completely uneventful and I loved it. I cooked some rice and beans, listened to the lake water lap at the shore, watched the fire crackle into embers. I slept like a rock, woke up to the sound of birds and a light mist rising off the lake. Exactly the kind of peace I was looking for. I spent most of Saturday hiking and just taking in the silence. Didn't see another soul, and honestly, I wasn't expecting to. By the time the sun started to go down, I was already back at my campsite, reading some old crime novel I'd brought. I remember it got colder faster than the night before. The sky turned that strange deep blue you only really see in autumn, just before it goes totally black. That's when I got the first text. I'd just finished adjusting the little lantern I'd hung inside the tent and sat down to heat up some canned soup. My phone buzzed on the corner of the camping table. No name, just a number with a New York area code I didn't recognize. The message said, "Soup and paperback. Solid combo." At first I smiled, thinking maybe it was one of the guys from work messing with me. I texted back, "Ha, who is this?" but didn't get a reply. 10 minutes went by. Then another message. "The lake's quiet tonight." My skin got cold. I looked around, half expecting someone to pop out laughing, but the woods were dead still. No wind, no footsteps, just trees. I walked a full circle around my camp with my flashlight, calling out, "Hey, if this is a joke, cool, you got me." Nothing. Just the sound of leaves shifting. I tried to shake it off and went back to my folding chair, but the air felt different, like the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, half hoping for another text, half dreading it. Around 9:30 I got one. This time it said, "You always stir the soup that way?" That was the moment it shifted from weird to deeply unsettling. I hadn't told anyone I was coming out here. No stories on Instagram, no group texts, nothing. And it wasn't just that someone knew I was stirring soup. It was the way they said it. Familiar, casual, like they'd been watching for a while. I didn't reply. I turned off the stove, didn't eat, and shoved everything into the tent. Inside, I sat cross-legged with my flashlight on low, phone in one hand and the little hatchet I'd brought for firewood in the other. I didn't want to overreact. I mean, yeah, it was creepy, but people do dumb things all the time. Maybe someone camping nearby was just screwing with me. I tried to convince myself of that, over and over, but I couldn't get past one detail. I hadn't seen another tent, hadn't heard another voice, and that old Nissan from the day before. It was gone when I came back from hiking. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it's stuck in my mind like a splinter. Around 10:15, I got another text. Just 3 words. "Look behind you." I froze. I didn't even breathe. I stayed like that for maybe 10 seconds, the kind of silence where your ears ring from the tension. Then I spun around and shined my flashlight out the mesh window behind me. Nothing. Just trees, the slope, the lake. But something was off. My lantern, the one I'd hung outside the tent on a little tree branch, was now lying on the ground, still lit and slowly swinging, like someone had just bumped. Dear, my throat went dry. I didn't hear any footsteps, no branches breaking, just that slow swing of the light. I waited. No more texts. I must have stayed sitting in that same position for over an hour, barely moving. Every little crack in the firewood outside made my pulse jump. I kept thinking, what if they're just waiting for me to come out? I finally decided to call someone. My brother, who's an EMT and pretty level-headed. But I had no signal. None. I had 2 bars earlier. I tried stepping. Halfway out of the tent, phone raised high, trying not to make a sound. Still nothing. I ended up retreating back inside, zipping it up and tying the zipper shut with a shoelace. It felt ridiculous, childish even, but I had this gut feeling that whatever was out there wasn't messing around. At some point, I must have dozed off sitting up because I jolted awake to the sound of leaves crunching. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone trying not to be heard. It was close, right outside the tent. I held my breath and didn't move a muscle. The steps stopped just a few feet from me, and then silence. Total silence, like the woods themselves were holding their breath too. And then I heard it, a faint click, the unmistakable sound of a phone camera. I was too scared to look out. I just sat there in the dark, every muscle tense, listening for the next sound. But there wasn't one. After what felt like an hour, I finally whispered, "Go away." And somehow saying it out loud made it all feel, even more real. The next thing I remember was waking up again, the sun just barely coming up. I don't know how I fell asleep after that, but I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion. I stepped outside with my heart still pounding, and the first thing I saw was the lantern, now completely out, lying sideways in the dirt. And then, about 2 feet from my tent, I found it. A cigarette butt, still slightly warm, and a partial footprint in the damp soil. A big one. Not like a hiking boot, more like a work boot, wide and flat. I don't smoke, and I definitely don't wear boots like that. I looked around the site trying to find any sign that someone had been there. Nothing. No tire tracks, no other footprints, no gear. Just those two quiet little things. I packed up everything as fast as I could. No breakfast, no coffee. Just tossed it all into the trunk and hit the road. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station with service. When my phone finally loaded back up, I had one unread message from that number. It just said, "You should really lock your car at night." I don't think I've ever felt a fear like that, because now I wasn't just thinking about who was watching me. I was thinking about how close they'd really gotten. I had locked my car, I was sure of it. I remembered double-checking the key fob before bed, but I opened the door that morning without unlocking it. It was just open. I changed my number the next day and haven't been back to that campsite, or any remote one, since. I told my brother everything, and he offered to go back up there with me, but I said no. I didn't want to know what we'd find. I never got another text after that, and sometimes I wonder if that person just wanted to scare me, if it was just a sick thrill. But the thing that really messes with me is the detail. How they knew what I was doing, what I was eating, how I stirred my soup. Either they were watching the entire time, or they were a lot closer than I ever realized. I still lock every window twice before bed, and I haven't camped alone since. Story 3. This happened to me and my brother last fall, early November. I was 28, he was 31, and we'd been trying to plan a short camping trip for months, but kept pushing it off. Life just kept getting in the way, work, relationships, all the usual stuff. We both needed a break. So we picked this old camping area in western Pennsylvania, not far from where we grew up. It's not an official campground, more like a known spot among local hikers and off-grid folks. The kind of place that doesn't show up on many maps, but if you're from around there, you know it. It's near this rusted old fire tower that hasn't been in use for decades. That's the landmark people use to find the spot. Creepy as hell, especially in fog, but the views are incredible. We drove up in my brother's truck, camped straight out of the back with one of those roof tents. Got there Friday afternoon, set up near the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the tower. Weather was cold but not freezing, just enough to make coffee taste amazing. The area was completely empty, not a single other person or car. That wasn't too weird though. The place is way off the beaten path, and it was shoulder season. We were actually kind of excited to have the place to ourselves. My brother said something like, "Hell yeah, no screaming kids, no drunk college bros." The only sound was wind through the pines and our boots crunching on dry leaves. That night started great. We grilled some burgers over the fire, threw back a couple of beers, and watched the sky change. There's no light pollution out there. Stars like I hadn't seen in years. Around 9:30, we were just sitting by the fire, not even talking much, just zoning out in the glow. That's when we heard it. A knock. Just one. It sounded like someone tapped a stick on a tree. Sharp, deliberate. maybe 30 or 40 yards away, just outside the range of the firelight. We both froze and looked at each other. I said, "You hear that?" And my brother nodded, face serious. He's not the type to get spooked. He was a volunteer firefighter for years, seen some wild stuff. But that sound made him sit up straight. We listened. Nothing. Just the wind again, brushing through the branches like a whisper. We figured it could have been anything. A branch falling, an animal knocking something over. We even joked that maybe a deer had learned how to knock. But then 5 minutes later it happened again. Same knock, same rhythm, but from a different direction this time. Slightly closer. This time, my brother stood up and pointed his flashlight toward the trees, but all we saw was bark and shadows. No movement, no eyeshine, nothing. "Weird," he muttered, but I could tell from the way he kept turning around that he was just as on edge as I was. We tried to go back to normal after that, but the mood had shifted. The fire didn't feel as warm anymore, and the woods suddenly felt a lot bigger, like we weren't alone in them. My brother threw a few more logs on the fire and said, "Maybe it's a raccoon screwing with us." I nodded, but I didn't believe that for a second. We grew up around the woods. We know the difference between an animal rummaging and something intentional. Those knocks were deliberate, clean, like someone standing still and just tapping, not banging, not rushing, like they wanted to be heard but not seen. It kept happening. Every 10, 15 minutes, a single knock, then another. Always moving, sometimes farther away, sometimes closer, but never in the same place twice. It was like someone was circling us. That's the part that got under my skin. The randomness of it, like it was mapping our reactions, testing our limits. Around 11 p.m., we killed the fire early and climbed up into the roof tent. My brother kept his flashlight and a pocket knife next to his sleeping bag. I had my multi-tool and a little LED lantern. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both too uneasy to just fall asleep. We kept the rain flap open, staring out into the dark like kids afraid of monsters. It was after midnight when we heard the knock again, but this time it wasn't distant. It came from right next to the truck, right there. Like someone was standing by the passenger door and just tapped the side of the truck bed. We both sat up at the same time, didn't say a word. My brother turned off his flashlight and we sat in silence, listening. Then another knock. Same rhythm now on the other side of the truck. Whatever it was, it had moved around us. Fast, quiet, too quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I whispered, "Should we get out?" And he shook his head immediately. "No, not unless we have to." And then came the worst part. Something brushed the fabric of the tent wall. Not violently, just a slow, dragging movement across the nylon, like a hand trailing along it. Then silence again. I swear I could hear breathing. My brother sat perfectly still, knife in hand, eyes wide. I reached for my phone to check the time and call someone, anyone, but it was dead. Battery drained, even though it was almost full when I went to bed. He checked his too. Same thing. I remember we just looked at each other like, what the hell is happening? The air inside the tent felt heavy, like the pressure dropped, like the woods were pressing in on us from all sides. We stayed like that until the first hint of light started breaking through the trees. Neither of us slept, not even a minute. At some point, the sounds stopped, and everything went dead quiet again. Not peaceful quiet, but empty, like we were the last people on Earth. As soon as the sun was strong enough to see more than a few feet, we climbed down and started checking the area. Nothing looked out of place at first. No gear missing, no footprints in the immediate area. But then we walked over to the passenger side of the truck, where we'd heard the first knock. That's when we saw the smudges, 3 of them, long, thin streaks on the fogged-up window, like someone had dragged their fingers slowly across it. Too high up to be a raccoon, too clean and deliberate to be a trick of condensation. We didn't say much, just looked at each other, packed up fast, and got the hell out of there. On the drive home, we tried to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe some local trying to mess with campers. Maybe a weird animal. But nothing made sense. The phone batteries dying at the same time, the constant movement around us. The feeling, more than anything else, that we were being studied. That's the part I can't shake. It didn't feel like a person trying to scare us. It felt like something was trying to understand us. watching how we reacted, testing how close it could get before we broke. We reported it to a park ranger on the way back through town, just in case someone else had experienced something similar. He just kind of shrugged and said that area hadn't been patrolled in years. When we told him it was near the old fire tower, he paused, then asked, "You guys stayed out there overnight?" I said yeah, and he just muttered, "Don't hear that much anymore," and walked back into his office. That didn't exactly help. We haven't gone camping since, and I don't think we will. Not in places that remote. These days I sleep better knowing there are neighbors nearby. Thin apartment walls never felt so comforting. I still think about those knocks though. Not every night, but often enough. There's something about how calm and controlled they were that gets under my skin. Like whoever, or whatever, it was, they weren't trying to scare us in the usual way. They were patient, observant, and if I had to guess, I'd say they'll probably be out there again this year, knocking on trees, waiting for someone else to answer. Story 4. This happened about a year ago, during a weekend. Team building trip organized by the marketing firm I work for. I was 26 at the time, pretty new to the company, and honestly not too thrilled about spending 2 nights camping with coworkers I barely knew outside of Zoom meetings. It was one of those forced bonding things. Someone from HR thought it'd be refreshing to get out into nature, so they booked this semi-rustic state park in North Carolina. We were split into carpool groups and handed pre-packed gear bags like we were joining some corporate survival reality show. I didn't want to be the antisocial new guy, so I went along with it, even if I already hated the idea. The campsite itself wasn't bad. It was a designated group site with room for a dozen tents, surrounded by thick forest on 3 sides and a narrow trail that led down to a lake. There were about 15 of us total, most of whom I only really knew by first name. My tent ended up near the back edge of the site, closer to the woods. The first night was fine. S'mores, beer, people oversharing after one too many White Claws. I ended up actually having a good time, laughing more than I thought I would. We wrapped up around midnight, and I crashed in my tent thinking, hey, maybe this won't be so bad after all. The second night was different. Same setup, dinner, drinks, stories around the fire. I remember someone was halfway through telling a ghost story when Kelly, the kind of person who always had a flashlight in her hand even when it wasn't necessary, squinted into the woods and said, "Is someone out there?" We all turned. Maybe 100 yards away, just past the last row of trees, there was a single beam of light. It wasn't moving, just hovering there between the trunks. No flickering, no color, just a steady, cold white light. We figured it was probably a hiker who wandered a little too close. A couple people yelled out, "Hey, all good!" But the light didn't move. It just stayed there, pointed in our direction. After a few minutes, the light disappeared, clicked off in an instant. Someone made a joke about Bigfoot being shy, and we all laughed. But it was that nervous kind of laugh, like when you're not sure if something's actually funny or just unsettling. People slowly drifted back into conversation, and someone brought out another bottle of wine. But I couldn't stop glancing back at the trees. Something about how still that light had been. It didn't feel right. It wasn't swaying like someone walking. It wasn't bobbing like a handheld flashlight usually does. It was just fixed, like it had been placed there deliberately. About an hour later, just when everyone was starting to wind down and talk about turning in, the light came back. Same spot, but this time it was closer. Maybe 50 yards now. Still dead still. Still pointed right at us. This time, no one joked. I remember Kelly saying, "Okay, that's not funny anymore," and standing up with her hands on her hips, like she was ready to go confront whoever it was. One of the guys, Nick, I think, told her to sit down, that it might be someone messing with us or even a ranger checking on the noise. But I looked around and realized something that made my stomach tighten. We hadn't seen a single other group at the park since we arrived. No passing hikers, no other campsites in use. We were the only ones out here. We tried calling out again. "You need help? Are you lost?" Nothing. The light stayed fixed for maybe 5 more minutes. Then, just like before, click, gone. This time, nobody went back to their whine. Everyone just sat there, quiet. It was one of those moments where you could feel the shift in the group, like the air itself had gotten thicker. Some people started grabbing their phones, shining their own lights toward the tree line. A couple others just awkwardly announced they were heading to bed early. No one said it, but we were all creeped out. Something about the way that light shut off so fast. It wasn't like someone walking away. It was like someone flipping a switch. I decided to stay up a bit longer by the fire, mostly because I didn't want to lie in the dark with that image stuck in my head. Kelly stayed too, sitting across from me, poking at the embers with a stick. We didn't talk much, just kept glancing over our shoulders every now and then. That's when my phone buzzed. I figured it was just a low battery warning or maybe a message from one of the co-workers who went to bed. But when I checked it, my stomach dropped. It was a photo. No message, no number. Just a photo sent through AirDrop. It was us, me and Kelly, sitting at the fire, taken from behind the tree line. Taken maybe 30 seconds ago. I showed her, and she immediately stood up, flashlight shaking in her hand. I could hear her breathing pick up short and sharp. I turned my light toward the woods and started scanning. Nothing. Just trees, shadows, silence. "We need to wake the others," I said. But Kelly was already moving, rushing toward the tents. Followed, shouting to the others that someone was out there. A couple of people thought we were messing with them, until I showed them the photo. Then the panic spread like wildfire. People locking car doors, zipping tents shut, grabbing anything that could feel like protection. We called the park ranger line, no answer. No signal either. Everyone was awake now. No one went back to sleep. We stayed grouped near the fire for the rest of the night. No one wanted to be alone. A few people had chairs, pulled in close. Some just sat wrapped in sleeping bags, flashlights aimed constantly toward the woods. At some point around 3 a.m., we heard what sounded like slow footsteps on the gravel near the edge of the site. 3, maybe 4 steps, and then nothing. No light, no voice, just that brief sound like someone wanted us to know they were still out there. It was that kind of silence after where everyone holds their breath at the same time. Then someone, Nick, I think, started yelling, cursing into the trees, demanding whoever it was come out. Nothing, not even an echo, just the quiet pressing back in. When the sun finally started to rise, none of us had slept. We did a quick sweep of the area once we had enough light to see clearly. We found no footprints, no flashlight, no camera, nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. Near the tree line, in the exact spot where the light had first appeared, we found something stuck into the ground. A small wooden stake, like the kind used to mark trails. Tied to it was a single Polaroid photo. It showed our entire group sitting around the fire from the first night, taken from the same angle as the one that had been airdropped. The thing is, no one remembered hearing a camera click. No one had brought a Polaroid, and we hadn't seen anyone else in that park, not once. We packed up immediately. No breakfast, no coffee. Everyone agreed to cut the trip short, and honestly, I don't think anyone wanted to stick around to see if the light would come back a third time. We reported everything to the park office when we left, showed them the photo, described the events. The woman at the desk just looked confused and said no rangers had been on duty that night. According to the records, we'd been the only registered group in the entire park that weekend. She offered to file a report, but it felt more like a formality. We left feeling like we knew more than anyone else wanted to admit. No one at work ever brought it up again, not officially. Few co-workers who were there will still joke nervously about it during happy hour, but there's always this underlying tension. Like we all know it wasn't just a prank or some local playing games. Something was out there. Something that had been watching us from the beginning. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed one more night. If that photo hadn't come through when it did. Or worse, if it hadn't come through at all. Story 5. My girlfriend and I were on a long road trip through the Midwest last summer. Just driving without a fixed route, stopping wherever we felt like. We'd been doing it for about a week, sleeping in our converted van, mostly in free or cheap campgrounds we found through apps. It was honestly one of the best trips we've ever done. Lots of long drives, quiet dinners under the stars, and nights spent listening to frogs and wind instead of phones and traffic. Around the 4th night, we were somewhere in rural Nebraska, off a 2-lane highway that ran through nothing but fields and grain silos. We pulled off at a tiny privately owned campsite that looked almost abandoned, except for the little hand-painted sign that said, "Open." The office was an old trailer with a bell on the door, and a dry erase board that said, "Pick your spot, leave cash in the box." It was that kind of place. Honest, simple, old school. We were the only van there when we arrived around 5 p.m., but we noticed a green and gray dome tent set up at the far end of the field, tucked into a patch of trees. It looked weathered, like it had been there a while. No car nearby, no campfire, nothing else around it. We figured someone was out hiking, or maybe parked somewhere else nearby. We waved toward it anyway, kind of a force of habit. No one waved back, but again, we assumed no one was inside. That night, we made dinner on the portable stove, cracked open some ciders, and played cards under the little string lights we'd hung on the van. It was peaceful, quiet the way only the middle of nowhere can be. But around 10 p.m., my girlfriend looked toward the woods and said, "Did you see that?" I turned but didn't catch anything. She said she thought someone was walking between the trees near the tent, but it was too dark to tell. We turned on our flashlight and scanned, called out a soft, "Hey, you good?" But there was no response, no movement either. We chalked it up to her eyes playing tricks and called it a night. The next day we noticed something strange. The tent hadn't changed. Still zipped up tight. Still no sign of anyone moving around. What really stuck with me, though, was the fact that there were no footprints in the dirt around it. Not even the flattened grass you'd expect near the entrance. It was like no one had come or gone. Out of curiosity, I walked a wide circle around it. Not too close, just enough to peek. From the angle I was at, I could see into the little mesh window near the top. What I saw inside made me pause. A pile of crumpled fast food bags, a few empty water bottles, and what looked like a dirty sleeping bag curled into the corner. It didn't look recently used. It looked abandoned. We debated whether to go tell the owner, but we hadn't actually seen anyone running the place. No one came by to check anything. Just the cash box and a tiny camera taped above it, probably fake. Around noon, a rusted blue pickup truck pulled into the lot and parked near the trailer. A guy in his 60s got out. Big. Frame, gray stubble, camo jacket despite the heat. He looked like the kind of guy who's either incredibly friendly or the opposite. I approached him and said, "Hey, we're staying the night, just wanted to ask, do you know anything about the tent out there?" He looked toward the tree line, squinted, and said, "Ain't nobody checked in for that spot in over a week." Then he added, "You sure someone's in there?" I said no. He just gave a tight shrug and said, "Some folks leave stuff behind. Happens. More than you think." That gave me a bad feeling, the kind that sits low in your stomach. My girlfriend and I talked about leaving, but we were already settled and didn't want to overreact. That night, we went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easy. Every little sound outside made us freeze. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft shuffle noise near the back of the van, like someone dragging their feet across the gravel. I held my breath, trying to decide if I should peek out the curtain or just stay still. Then I heard it, whispering, right outside the window. Too low to make out words, but unmistakably a voice. Not loud, not angry, just speaking, like a conversation was happening inches from where we slept. I slowly reached for my phone, but of course we'd put it on the dashboard to charge. I tapped my girlfriend's arm and she was already awake, eyes wide, holding her breath too. The whispering went on for another 30 seconds before stopping completely. No footsteps, no retreating sounds, just silence. I finally worked up the nerve to peek out through the side curtain. There was no one there, but what made my skin crawl was the fact that the condensation on the glass, which had been light and foggy from the temperature difference, now had 3 long, clean streaks across it, like someone had wiped it with their fingers to look inside. We sat there for the rest of the night, fully awake, not saying much. When the sun finally rose, we got out and did a full circle around the van. No one was around. The other tent looked exactly the same, untouched. This time we walked straight up to it. I knocked on the fabric wall. Nothing. I unzipped the flap just enough to peek inside. It smelled musty, like old clothes left in the rain. The sleeping bag hadn't moved. Neither had the trash. There was mold growing on one of the food wrappers. No one had slept in there for a long time. And yet someone, or something, had walked around our van in the middle of the night. We packed up faster than we ever had. No breakfast, no coffee, just grabbed everything and threw it in the van. I went to leave a note at the trailer explaining what happened, but the old guy was already gone. The truck wasn't there. The trailer door was shut and locked like no one had ever been there. We drove in silence for a solid hour before either of us said a word. My girlfriend finally said, "I don't think we were alone last night." And that's exactly how it felt. Like we were being watched. Not in a threatening, violent way, but in a way that made your skin crawl. Like someone was studying us, quietly, patiently. Later that day, out of pure curiosity, I checked the app where we found that site. The listing was gone. Vanished. No reviews, no location marker, nothing. I even tried checking my browser history for the link, but it just led to a blank page. I asked around in some camping forums, described the area, and a few people said it sounded familiar, but no one I could point to anything exact. A couple even messaged me saying they remembered a similar site, but it had been shut down years ago after someone went missing. One guy said, "I stayed there in 2018, same tent, same spot. Never saw anyone come or go." That was the last message he sent me. We still talk about it sometimes, usually when we're setting up camp somewhere very public. Bright lights, lots of neighbors. I haven't done a remote stay since. I don't think I ever will. There was something deeply wrong about that place. Something unnatural in how quiet it was and how easy it was for someone to get close without being heard. I can't prove anything, and maybe it sounds like paranoia, but I know what I heard. I know what we saw, and I know that the feeling of being watched that night wasn't in our heads. So if you're ever out driving through Nebraska and you see a little hand-painted sign on the side of the road that says "Open," pointing down a gravel path into the trees, do yourself a favor, keep driving.